The old conception that newspapers only publish what they think will sell newspapers is maybe true in some newspapers and in some respects, and of course it has an application to us as well. And indeed it can be turned into a criticism of us, as it can be used as a criticism of other newspapers. But the test, it seems to me, is are you prepared to run stories which may offend readers, which may lose your readers, because you believe it's in the public interest, because you believe you're performing a public service in doing that. Now we've certainly tried to do that.
Can you give me an example?
It's a case, something for which the Age has always been, well, I think just simply editorial courage. The role we've consciously tried to adopt is the role which I believe fulfills the Age's tradition, and that is as a campaigning newspaper. I've always, I'm talking principles here rather than particular examples. I believe that muckraking is a legitimate newspaper function. That if there's muck to be raked, then it's a newspaper's responsibility to get in and rake it, because I believe there are a few other institutions in the community which can do it.
Do you admit quite freely to being more than somewhat suspicious of bureaucracy?
No, I'm not. I'm not suspicious I think in the sense in which you're speaking. I just simply believe that it's one of the newspaper's prime responsibilities to keep bureaucracy, government, under test. We are natural opponents of governments.
Why?
Because if we're not, who is, you see? I just see us representing the public. And I get sometimes, and I'm in despair because no one else represents the public. Now this may be a terrible piece of presumption on my part. And indeed I suppose I could produce lots of people to say just that it's presumptuous of me or of any newspaper to say that he represents the public. But there are so many cases where it's demonstrably true, where if a newspaper doesn't speak for the public, if a newspaper doesn't represent the view of the man in the street, the average man, then that view doesn't really get represented at all. Now, just a few weeks ago, for example, we ran a series of leading articles, of editorials, which intensely political in character, but which were quite blatantly, we declared it, designed to influence the federal government's preparation of the budget. Now, you may have observed that there are hardly two economists in Australia which agree about the current economic climate. And one had to confess at the start that we are no more equipped to answer it than they are. But in making some judgments and expressing some opinions, you talk to a number of people.
If anybody asks, who are you to make decisions that you do make, I presume that you'd think being objective would be a good reason why yourself, as a journalist, should control something like The Age. Would you agree with that?
It's a claim I'd make with some diffidence, because absolute objectivity seems to me to be probably unattainable. I think everybody, whether you work on a newspaper or not, obviously has built-in beliefs and prejudices and has a set of convictions which have obviously got to control his reactions to, if you're talking about newspapers, people in particular, then obviously convictions and prejudices and beliefs affect the judgment he makes on stories, on the treatment of stories, on the words in stories. I hope that the people that we try to bring into journalism these days are people with convictions and with beliefs who I don't particularly care for people who believe in nothing, who are complete cynics about the world. These people seem to me to be positively dangerous. But what I would, rather than use the word objectivity, the word I would use is balance and fairness.
Do you think people generally believe what they read in your paper?
like to think so. But if I may speak for the press generally, I think we have a very low credibility rating, some of which is deserved and some which isn't. But the press is not judged on the rationale of papers like The Age so much as it's judged on some of its wilder manifestations. And people are inclined to treat the press as a single institution rather than as a group of individual newspapers, all of them very different in character, all trying, many of them trying to do a much different job. And but I, to get a fair criticism of newspapers, is a criticism I've made publicly myself, that our credibility rating is not as high as I'd like it to be.
Do many mistakes in matters of fact occur?
Of course they do. Of course they do, and will ever occur. You must understand with newspapers. First of all, we're working against a deadline. We're extraordinary human beings. We make the same sort of errors that you make and everybody else makes. Errors of judgment, errors of commission and omission. But our night's got to finish at 11 o'clock, and what's not done then doesn't get done.
Anybody's seen Bob Painting? No way. This bloody property says it obviously should start with British option, British Blue.
Come on. Hop on, eh?
I used to say, and always still believe that probably 10 years is the maximum life for an editor. I think after that, perhaps you need a new editor, and the paper needs regeneration and new ideas because it's an essentially creative process. And I've been doing it for 8 years, so perhaps I'm running out of time. But I like doing it. No, it's all. We don't have to get a start.
Oh, we went out to say now it's finished.